Well, hello, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to our first program of the year. I am Tina DeBelgard. I'm the Vice President of the Upper Hudson chapter of Sisters in Crime. We are the Mavens of Mayhem. Our President, Carol, would have liked to host for you today, but she was unable, Carol Pulio, but she will be with us in our next program. Please, in fact, I'll add it when I'm finished speaking, I'll add it to the chat. Please, if you're new to our chapter, visit our website and so you can find out about additional programming. We meet on the third Saturday of the month, and in March we will have our Murderous March conference, so please don't forget to look into that. Registration is open. Our guests of honor are Katrina McPherson and Hank Philip Ryan. We have panels, master classes, pitching workshop, speed dating. It'll be a lot of fun, and it's all virtual, so you don't have to leave home. It'll be great. What I'm going to do today, what we have today is our guest speaker is John DeDakis. We're very excited that he's joining us today. He comes to us from Baltimore. John is a novelist, a writing coach, a manuscript editor, and he's a former senior copy editor for CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. John has written 5 novels in the Lark Chadwick mystery suspense thriller series. The title of his talk today is From Journalist to Novelist, or How I Learned to Start Making It Up. Welcome, John. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks, Tina. It's good to be here, and it's good to see you all. I think Susan Beers is about the only one I know. Hi, Susan. It's good to see you. I'm trying to think of where we met. Was it up in Maine or Vermont? Maryland. All right.
We're the diocese.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Well, anyway, I'm going to share my screen, and Tina, if you wouldn't mind, or someone at least to curate the chat, because I want to be responsive to your questions, but I don't have the I can see the chat, but it's going to be distracting to me. Yes. So if you have questions, that's probably a good place to put them, but I'm certainly fine with it just being informal and a Q&A as well. But let me just make sure I can share my screen so that you have something to look at. You should see my name there. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see my picture?
Yes.
Everything's good. All right. Okay. Tina, is that a thumbs up? You can all see fine?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Oh, well, given what you have to work with. All right. So anyway, that's me. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about from journalist to novelist, or how I learned to start making it up. And so we'll I'll take you through my career. And if you've got questions, I certainly hope you'll get a chance to ask them, when I'm finished. I'm from La Crosse, Wisconsin. It's that green star there on Wisconsin's west coast, otherwise known as the Mississippi River. And that's a shot of La Crosse from the Minnesota Bluffs, looking east across the river into downtown La Crosse. And you can see in the upper left of the corner there, that's Granddad's Bluff. That's, a great landmark in La Crosse. Wonderful place to go with a date after a movie. La Crosse is well known for old style beer. The Train Air Conditioning Company was founded there and is still there. That's the mom and the dad. My dad was a lawyer. My mom was an elementary school teacher. They were married for 53 years. So I really am fortunate that I came from a really stable background, and the more I teach writing and I edit people's manuscripts, and the more I talk to people, the more disappointing it is, I think, that there's so much dysfunction out there. And I realized late in life, I think, that I was born on second base at a time when a lot of people didn't even have the right to suit up, much less play the game. So I'm now well aware of the, basically you could say, entitlement that I had. My dad was born in Greece, you can see Corinth there in the Peloponnese. He was born in a small village about 30 miles west of Corinth. My grandmother, my grandfather was born in Athens, my grandmother in a small town nearby. They shared their first kiss on the Acropolis in 1903. And my dad came over to the US when he was 6 years old. And the name was originally spelled DeDakis, Ntentakis. It got Ellis Island to Dedakis in 1913. My grandparents settled in Chicago, and there was a typo in the Chicago phone book, and they accidentally capitalized the second letter, the second D. So my grandpa said, "That's cool." I don't know what the Greek equivalent is of "that's cool," but there are several DeDakises out there, but the ones that came from my grandpa have the second D capitalized as well. It is not Dukakis. And of course, he ran for president. He was the governor of Massachusetts, running for president in 1988. And my wife and I lived in Atlanta at the time, and she was in the checkout line at the supermarket and was writing a check, and the checkout person goes, "Oh, Dukakis, are you related?" And she said, "No, it's, he spells his name Dukakis. Ours is Dedak. Oh," she said, "Oh, are you related?" So, and I had a sergeant in the Army who called me Dudakai. And I said, no, it's DeDakis. He said, "That's what I said, Dudakai." So I'm certainly, Tina, you did a great job getting the name right. That's a rarity. I'm so used
I have
to
my own problems with names, so you
exactly. So anyway, that's who I am. That's the mom and the dad again. And interesting story there. As I mentioned, they were married for 53 years. And my mom died of a pulmonary embolism in 1990. And the interesting story there is that she had two older sisters, and the oldest one died, and the other one was a good friend of my dad's. And so she lived in Houston, Texas. And so, and her husband had died just a few months after my mom did. So my dad and my Aunt Nita, who also is my godmother, they would call each other and encourage each other. And Aunt Nita told me that at one point she got so lonely that she got down on her knees and prayed that some nice man would come along, and maybe they could be friends, and maybe it could even be more than that. The next day, my dad called and proposed long distance. That's an answered prayer, right? Well, what do you suppose she said? She said, "Let me think about it." So she thought about it. She went to a friend and said, "George proposed. What should I do?" And the guy said, "Well, you guys have been, spending time at each other's homes. If you don't marry him, people are going to think you're a floozy." So my dad called the next day asking for her response. I mean, he was a lawyer. He needed, let's get this done. And so she said, "Well, George, my friend said that if I don't marry you, people will think I'm a floozy." And he said, "Nita, what makes you think you're not a floozy?" So she said yes. And that's a picture of them on their wedding day. It's a little weird to be at your dad's wedding. So my Aunt Nita became my stepmom, and her son became my cuz-bro. And this was a beautiful dress, and I learned the word fuchsia that day. Moving on. That's me, Geek of the Year in 1956. Anyway, we'll move on, because here's the point. Life doesn't always turn out the way you expect. In real life, it's a crisis often. In journalism, we call it a story. And in fiction, it's a plot twist. And we all have plot twists. It's just a matter, that's what plot is. It's cause and effect. Something happens, and then something happens as a response. In my case, if I had followed my career trajectory, I would have been the guy sworn in on the steps of the Capitol in 2008 instead of that guy from Kenya or wherever Trump says he's from. But I mean, really, I'm serious. This is really where I wanted to live for at least 4 years and 8 if I could. But for the good of the country, I decided to go in a different direction. And the reason that I did goes all the way back to 1968. The Vietnam War was in all the papers. It was a big deal. And they had a draft back then. And if you had a number below 150, chances are you were going to get drafted and sent to the jungles of Vietnam. My number was 14. Didn't look real good, but I had a student deferment. Everything was cool. But the thing that bothered me is that the anti-war fervor at the University of Wisconsin was intense. And this is sort of a typical day in Madison. I'm not in the picture, but riots and demonstrations were the norm. And the thing that frustrated me is that when I was on my way to class, I was bombarded from both the left and the right to take a position for or against the war, never mind that I'd never really thought it through. And I just resented the overheated rhetoric from both sides. So when I was in the dorm rooms in the bull sessions, I'd argue the right-wing line of my Nixon Republican parents. And when I was at home at Thanksgiving, I'd argue the left-wing line I was hearing at school. And when I was alone, I was confused. And so I volunteered at a campus radio station. And there I am covering a teaching assistant strike in 1969. That's me with my little microphone in my hand. That's a picture from the Daily Cardinal taken during the one of the demonstrations or one of the gatherings. And so journalism was a good perch to sit on to try to figure out what was going on. And again, things happen that you don't expect and you have to respond to them. Well, in my case, I mentioned that I was number 14 in the lottery, and I covered one of the riots after Kent State. And I got tear gassed, and my parents heard their little boy getting tear gassed on the radio. So they suggested that I should transfer schools. And I'd had it with all the campus chaos by then. So I made a transfer from Madison to La Crosse, closer to home. And here's the wrinkle. Playboy magazine voted UW-Madison the #1 party school in the country. And I'd seen it as my personal mission to be the #1 partier at the #1 party school. I didn't succeed, but I had so much fun trying that my grade point average was 1.95. So I was that close to getting kicked out of school. And when I transferred, I lost my student deferment. So now this is an existential crisis. Well, I won't go into all the details, but long story short, I enlisted to avoid the draft because I wasn't sure I was actually a conscientious objector, but my dad, who had been in World War II and was on the draft board, said, look, apply as a military journalist and who knows, maybe things will be okay. So I enlisted. That's me at Fort Lewis, Washington in 1971 with my bayonet between my teeth and my M16. And here's the thing, I got orders to Vietnam. Well, we're talking plot twist now because 2 weeks before I was to ship out, my orders were changed to Germany. And I spent the next 2.5 years at the headquarters of the American Forces Radio and Television Network in Frankfurt, Germany, doing interviews for a special events radio unit. That's my boss on the right, Herb Glover. That's me on the left. And Herb had worked with Walter Cronkite at CBS. And so Herb had journalistic chops. And one of the first interviews he assigned me to do was with this guy named Alfred Hitchcock. Maybe you've heard of him. Now, this was a mentoring moment because Herb could have done the interview in his sleep. And instead, he trusted this 22-year-old kid not to screw it up. And what I discovered is what I was good at and what I loved. And when you put those two things together, then you really have some purpose and propulsion going forward. So got out of the Army and went to school, got a journalism degree, 3.5 average. I'm not brilliant, but I grew up. And so, of course, my parents My parents thought I joined the dark side because remember, as far as they were concerned, the press ran Nixon out of the White House. So my mom basically said, this is the Ruth DeDakis rule of journalism. She said, if I ever hear any bias in your reporting, even if it's an opinion I agree with, you failed. Just give me the facts and let me make up my own mind. So, in fact, there's an axiom in journalism. If your mother tells you she loves you, check it out. So I had, even though I disappointed, my mom said, you lowered your sights, John. And maybe I had, because to be honest with you, one of the reasons I didn't go into law and go into practice with my dad is I just was afraid. I was afraid I was going to fail, not get into law school or not do well in law school. And so, I went into journalism instead. And the last conversation I ever had with my father, I asked him, I said, Dad, are you okay that I didn't go into journalism with you and into practice with you? And he said, yeah, I'm okay with that. And then he paused a beat and he said, but you would have been a great trial attorney. So it's the path I never took. I'll never know, but journalism has been a good experience. My first television job was at WMTV, the NBC affiliate in Madison, Wisconsin. You could probably caption this another reason why you shouldn't do drugs, or Buff Madison porn star. We'll move on. I covered the White House for the last 3 years of Reagan's presidency. This is me. I'm on the far right there, my camera crew, Tony Black and Carrie O'Berry. Larry Speaks was Reagan's press secretary. That's Larry sitting at the Resolute desk with Reagan. And this was a piece we were doing on the White House press corps versus the president. And the takeaway for that was that it's an adversarial relationship no matter what president is in power, because it's Larry's job as press secretary to make the president and his policies appear to be perfect. It's our job as reporters to find out what's really going on. And so that is by nature the essence of the friction that's just a part of the relationship between the press and the press corps. This whole thing of fake news, it's nothing new. It goes all the way back. And so you write what you know. And my novels, all of my novels have journalism as a backdrop, because I try to give people a glimpse behind the scenes so that people understand how journalism is done. And I talk to a lot of people who wag their finger at me about fake news, but they've never talked to a reporter before. They have no idea how it's done. I remember talking to one woman, I was at a book signing and she was going off on me about fake news. And I said, where do you get your news? She said, Breitbart. And my jaw dropped. And before I could say anything else, she said, well, I have to have my opinion reinforced. And I said, no, you actually have to have your opinion informed. Then you can go wherever you want, to reinforce it. But we no longer have we no longer have news outlets where everyone can agree on. We no longer have facts that we can agree on. We're in parallel universes. We won't go into journalism right now, but maybe in your, the Q&A, you may want to get into that. But journalism has definitely gone through some changes. So moving on, I went to CNN in 1988 in Atlanta as a writer. And next plot twist is within 9 months, one of the editors I worked with said, have you ever thought about becoming an editor? I said, no. He said, you'd be a great editor. What he meant was, I want off nights and weekends, and you'd be a great warm body to replace me. And so sure enough, I took the job. He got off nights and weekends, and I did overnights for the next 7 years at least. And what I discovered is that editing was tedious. It paid well, but it was tedious. I needed a creative outlet. It was a great experience. I was one of Carol Costello's interviews or editors for a long time, and then we'd go down and play racquetball after work. And we must have played about 30 times. And you know how many times I won? 0. She sucks at tennis, but she's great at racquetball. And she's just so much fun as a person. She was great to work with. And then I transferred to DC and worked with Wolf Blitzer for the last 7 years. I was with CNN. This is me holding the Peabody Award that we won for our coverage of the 2008 presidential election. This represents the nanosecond that I was allowed to hold the damn thing before they took the picture. And then I had to give it back to Wolf, who's the one who really deserved it, because he's so smart. He didn't even need scripts or editors. He could just ad-lib the whole show. And he's a great person to work with, wonderful journalist. But as I say, editing was tedious and I needed a creative outlet. So back in, probably about 1995, I started writing a novel. And this is the first novel I wrote, but it's not that easy. Some of you are writers and you've been published and it doesn't just happen magically. This one went through 14 major revisions. It took me 10 years to get the agent I have. She's the 39th agent I queried. So if you take good notes, I tell my students, I'll save you 9 years in the process. So, and I write what I know. And so I should say also, this is the cover for the new edition, because the first publisher went out of business and amazingly a new one came along. So this is the spiffied up cover. Let me go back for just a second. I took that picture. I was lying in front of a freight train, and what we won't do to go through, to get our art, most of the shots we rejected because they were too blurry because I was jumping out of the way of the train. But truth be told, he had stopped. He let me lie in front of the train and I got my shot. So anyway, you write what you know. And the first scene of the first novel, Fast Track, is my sister's suicide, carbon monoxide poisoning. She was only 38 years old. She would have just turned 80 last week. And, what a loss. And as I stress to my writing students, write from the pain, access that pain, because that's not only a catharsis to be able to write about it, but chances are others have gone through it as well. And that's what writing does. It enables a person to get inside another person and another person's story. And that can be some compelling storytelling. So another personal experience that informs my writing goes back to 1959. That's me and my dad taken at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, where we had, gone to visit his mom, my grandma. And we always used to take the train, and I loved sitting in the Vista Dome. And one night I was sitting in this window here, the left front, and it was the middle of the night, and my face was pressed right, my nose grease was right up against the window, so I could watch the tracks as we were speeding down the rails. And out of the corner of my eye, out of nowhere, at this railroad crossing from the left here, a car came out of nowhere, crossed right in front of us. We hit it. All this debris came down on the Vista Dome, and we killed everybody in the car. The train came to a stop, and I was talking to a woman in the dining car, and she told me that, she said, I live, near here, and I'll send you a newspaper clipping of what happened. Well, 40 years later, I was still waiting for the newspaper clipping, but I was doing a writing exercise, and the writing exercise was write about a personal experience. So I started writing about this. And here's the thing that I discovered early on in my life about the power of the subconscious. Because as I was writing about this personal experience, I remembered a radio news report I'd heard 40 years earlier about a car train collision in which an infant survived. And I began to play what if? What if that kid had grown up and wanted to find out more about her past? And so that's the impetus of Fast Track. My protagonist, Lark Chadwick, is an orphan. Her parents are killed in a car accident, and her quest is to find out what really happened. So the kid who was one of the three people who was killed was just 11 years old, Raymond Stage. He was just 2 years older than I was at the time. So that's a sobering kind of thing to make you wonder, that you kind of face your mortality at that moment. And the interesting thing is, it happened in Chadwick, Illinois, and I named my protagonist Lark Chadwick. I have no idea where I got the name Lark, but Chadwick is Chadwick, Illinois. And I went back there for a book signing and met the ambulance driver who basically had to retrieve the bodies. And, we talked and he cried 50 years later, remembering that day. So this is the view that most guys have of my protagonist, Linda Carter, who you may know as Wonder Woman. This is the way Lark sees herself, as is a little more brainy and a little less of a babe. So that's who I have. And so I write as a woman, and we're going to talk about that. This is my second novel, Bluff. I hiked the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, and I'd written about 8 drafts before I realized I got to hike this thing. So I knew what the murder scene looked like. And when I saw it, this is the picture I took. And my publisher used it on the cover of the novel. So again, you write what you know. And that's the same publisher that went out of business. That's me there. I don't think I'm a little too old to hike it now, but that is at least proof positive that I was there. Oh, nuts. I wasn't able to show you the new cover, but here it is. I'll just hold it up briefly. I don't know if I can do that. It's because my background is blurred, so you can't see it. So anyway, Bluff is my second novel, and the new cover is a little more stunning than that. Troubled Waters, my third one. Lark becomes a cops and courts reporter in Georgia. Let me tell you a little bit about the family, because that is also, families are a great source of grist for fiction. That's my wife, Cindy, on the far end there. We've been married coming up on 45 years. I met her in church. I joined the church choir just to get involved, and she became the new choir director. And I've been taking direction ever since. She's really a smart, fun person. She does the New York Times crossword puzzle every week in pen, in ink. My daughter Emily is a PhD in creative writing. She lives in Belfast, Northern Ireland. That's my son James. He's a drummer and a photographer. And he was the drummer for the nationally known band Arizona for a long time. And my son Stephen is there. Steve was a cook at a high-end restaurant in Bethesda, Maryland, and also taught himself how to play drums. But again, you write what you know. And in our case, it didn't turn out well with Steve. He was only 22 years old when he went missing. And he was found dead in my car about a block and a half where we lived in Washington at the time, of an accidental heroin overdose. And the irony is, it was right by a light pole with a neighborhood watch sign on it. And I knew heroin was probably going to be a factor. And while he was still missing, I came up with this image. I woke up from a dream and had this image of a bullet in the syringe. And so I used that when I wrote my fourth novel, Bullet in the Chamber, because it's my feeling. I wanted to highlight the Russian roulette powerfulness of heroin, but I also felt that if the cops can make the connection between the fatal dose and the pusher, that they should charge the guy with second-degree murder. Because the way I looked at it, it was like selling a pistol with one bullet in the chamber to someone you know is going to play Russian roulette and you don't care. What I discovered in my research is it's not that easy. It's not a slam dunk. So, but again, writing was a catharsis. And so the subplot of Bullet in the Chamber deals with the events surrounding Stephen's disappearance and death. My most recent novel is Fake. Lark is a White House correspondent, and I started writing it when Trump was elected president. I did not write it so that it would be an anti-Trump polemic, but I was certainly troubled by his statement that journalists are the enemies of the American people, because I know from experience that it is a firing offense to make things up. But Lark is on the receiving end. She is a victim of fake news. There are consequences when false information is put out there. The book is now also an audiobook narrated by Candace Fitzgerald. And so being a writer has been a great experience. Why do I write as a female, you may ask? I'm sure there's a 12-step program that that I could join if I wanted to. There's a superficial reason I write as a woman, and there's a deep reason. The superficial reason is that when I first started writing, someone suggested that I should write as a way to stretch who I am. And I'd never been a woman before. So what the hell, I'd give that a try. And so I discovered that emotions aren't gender specific. We all have the exact same emotions. It's just that in my experience, women are more articulate about their emotions. They're more willing to share their emotions. Their emotional palette is more varied. So I love talking to women because they're so interesting. And so for 25 years at CNN, I had conversations with women in their early to mid 20s, interns, new hires, and they'd tell me about their boyfriends, their careers, their families, their parents. And I just listened to their stories and learned so much about what it's like to be a woman. And of course, then my beta readers are women as well. And so most novels are populated by both genders. So why not? I teach this class. I teach a class on how to write in the voice of the opposite sex. And one of the guys who took the class said, and this is a quote, he said, "I do not understand women, therefore I don't write them." And I thought, well, I appreciate your honesty, but geez, your book's got to be boring, man. So one of the things that I do in the class is I pair people up. And if I can pair them with people who are not of the same persuasion, either racially or ethnically or genderly, I get them to talk to each other. So they'll be married. I paired him up with a woman and they'll be married. No, I don't know if they got married, but I at least hope, she helped him understand what it's like to be a woman, because I had a great conversation with Carol Costello once. I said, you're beautiful. So why, what's it like for guys to come on to you all the time? And she said, I can tell in the first 20 seconds, A, if I'm interested, and B, if it's safe. I was like, I don't have to worry about it being safe. But I learned pretty quickly that, people like that are targets. And so they've got to make an instant calculation of, where's the escape mechanism here? That was an eye-opening experience. So there's a deeper reason I write as a woman. And again, this is going to go back to the subconscious, because I don't think I realized that until I was writing Bullet in the Chamber. And it goes back to my sister, Georgia. Georgia was, as you can see, she was beautiful. She was brilliant. She could have been a concert pianist. And her husband but here's the thing. She fell in love at 16. She got pregnant at 17. She got married at 18. And her husband basically said, what would it look like? She could have been a surgeon. What would it look like? A surgeon married to a football coach. So one by one, she gave up her dreams. And then 20 years later, went into the garage, closed the door, turned on the car, and ended it. And I didn't really go through grief counseling then. I did get some good advice. One bit of advice was move toward the pain. But I did go through grief counseling when Stephen died. And that was tremendous. If you ever have a chance to do any kind of therapy, I highly recommend it, because it's a safe place where you can talk about anything. And I went through grief counseling for about 2.5 years. And about a year after I left grief counseling, they asked me to come and give a talk as a fundraiser for the Went Center for Loss and Healing in DC. And this goes back to the subconscious, as I was writing my talk, I realized that there's a deeper reason that I write as a woman. And that is, I'm trying to create a character I wish my sister had allowed herself to become. Because Lark doesn't let herself become a victim. She doesn't let a guy define who she is. She still falls for the bad boy. She still has feet of clay. But, Lark is an opportunity for me, to have Georgia get it right. And that was buried in my subconscious for decades. So, I'm going to stop soon, but I do want to talk about quickly the power of the subconscious, because these are some of the takeaways that I've learned as a novelist. And some of you may already understand some of these concepts, but I'm going to run through them quickly, and then I'll stop and take your questions. First, the way I look at it, writing is like dipping a straw into your subconscious. And what ends up happening is that when you move your fingers, you are and you're stirring things up. And it's that act of writing that causes stuff to go from your subconscious onto the page. It's that what if. What would it be like for that kid to grow up and try to find out more about her parents? You write it down as you're answering the questions to the what if. You're trying to answer those what if questions in your stories. And with the writing exercises I do, I really encourage people to just write automatically. Ask, you can begin to get to know your characters by doing an interview. Ask them, who are you and why do you want to be in my book? And then listen to the answer and just write it down. Listen to that voice. It doesn't mean you're crazy. I mean, you might be crazy, but you're also creative. And so by asking those questions, you're stirring stuff up that's already in there, and it's giving it an opportunity to give it voice. One of the things I've learned in writing novels is to turn off my internal editor when I write the first draft. And there's a reason for that, because when you do that, not only are you tapping into your subconscious, but you write the novel all the way through, and it's an important psychological hurdle, because you get to the end and it's done. It sucks, but it's done. And it's this steaming pile of clay that then you'll be able to make better in the rewrite. So turning off your internal editor really allows you to access stuff that may be deeply buried. And then I suggest that when you write, don't write to be fancy or writerly, write to be clear. What is, you want to basically see what you see in your mind's eye and what you hear, you want to access that and get it onto the page. And just do that. And if you can do that, then the writing itself will take care of itself. Probably one of the biggest inhibitions is writer's block. And one of the things that causes a person to freeze up is, should I do first person or third person? And I mean, right from day one, you are in a straitjacket because you freeze and you go, well, I don't want to make a mistake. My suggestion is write it in first person for your first draft, because that's your comfort zone. We all communicate in first person. That's the way we tell jokes. That's the way we tell stories and anecdotes. So go there first, because that's your comfort zone. And then if it needs to be changed to third person, you can do that in the rewrite. So that will also get you out of the fear of perfection and writer's block, because this is what's counterintuitive. And this is the last point. The best way to overcome writer's block is to write. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. If you want to keep in touch, that's my email. Yes, it's AOL. Get over it. I already heard today, somebody, Aubrey, I think it is, had trouble with Gmail. I've never had trouble with AOL. So there. And that's my website, johndedakis.com. And I'd love to keep in touch, but I will stop my screen share and see if anybody is still here. I'm not seeing any dozing and drooling. I actually think more people have joined us. So I'll shut up, but thank you for your attention.
John, that was fascinating because you write from the perspective of a journalist and from personal trauma. You have so much to put into your writing. I mean, it was really fascinating. Thank you. Please, everybody, feel free to add your questions to the chat. I do have a couple that Carol had sent in because she couldn't join us, and she did ask me to ask some questions for you. Her first question was, how much reality from your experience as a reporter can you legally put into your books? Like,
Oh, wow.
it's actually a two-part question. And where do you draw the line at incorporating something that actually happened?
Well, I mean, look, you don't want to slander or libel anybody. Libel is print. And so, you know, if you're going to name someone who is not a public official, who's not a public, who's not a public person, then you've got to be very careful, you know, because if they're going to sue you for libel, you know, the only defense you have is truth, but it's not worth getting hauled into court. Anything beyond that is pretty much fair game. You know, you can draw from personal experience, and, you know, a lot of times people write autobiographically, but they, you know, they're going from personal experience. And so my suggestion is change the names. You know, if you really don't want to identify somebody, you know, change the locale, change their gender, change their career, you know, camouflage the small t truths in order to tell the big T truth. And so I think that's probably the best way around it. But real life is grist, and the only thing you really want to be careful about is libel and slander.
Good points. I have a comment here from Chris that says, thank you for that simple and profound advice. Write to be clear. And she sends good wishes to you and your family. She asked if you could tell us a little bit about your editing process.
Well, it's a two-prong approach. I really do try to write the first draft all the way through, but because I'm also an editor, I can't help myself. And so what I'll do is when I write a chapter, I'll stick with it for a couple of days. So I'll proofread it and I'll make sure the spelling is okay and that there aren't any repeated words and that it's smoothish. And once I feel like I've locked it in, then when I'm happy with it, I'll lock it in and then I'll move on. And I'm writing a memoir now, and the chapter I'm working on now, I haven't seen in 2 years. So that's basically seeing it fresh. And that's another advantage of going and having that forward momentum. I'm also a manuscript editor. So I edit people's manuscripts. And a lot of times if I'm doing a deep dive edit, which means I need to be meticulous about catching everything, I'll mouth it. I'll read it out loud, basically, because that slows you down, so that you're more likely to see, you know, those little nitpicky details. Because the closer you get to your own story, the more you know the words, and you just fill it in and you kind of glean over it. So that's when it's time to bring in beta readers. You know, these are the people who love you. They know you're writing a novel. They're itching to get their hands on it, but you want to give them, and they'll tell you, it's wonderful, you know, it needs to be a movie. That's great. You need to hear that encouragement, but you need to give them permission to tell you what's not working. And that feedback is tremendously helpful because, you know, someone may say, you don't want to be the kind of person who says, you know, well, if you'd read page 5, you'd know what happened on page 200, you'd understand. And they're telling you, lay down some more breadcrumbs so I'm oriented so that I'm right with you on page 200 because of this clue you planted on page 5. So I don't know if that answers the question, but editing is certainly a big part of the process.
It does. And Chris said that she'll take smoothish to heart. I think that was a word she was thinking could be helpful to her.
I just made it up.
I love it. I have a beta reader question to just jump in a little, cut the line, but it's pertinent here. when you choose your beta readers or ask your beta readers, are you asking mostly readers, writers, journalists? Do you have an approach? How many beta readers do you get?
Whoa, that's an excellent question. Very practical. Yes to all of the above. It sort of depends. There are probably 3 women who are my regular beta readers. They're reliable because I know they're going to come at me with a gazillion questions and comments that will make me think. They're not fixing my book for me, but they're telling me what's not working and what I need to address. And these are people who, some of them are journalists, some of them are just women, that qualifies them. There have been times when I, for instance, in Troubled Water, that book where Lark is a cops and courts reporter. One of my friends is a 911 trainer. She trains 911 operators. And one of the lessons I teach about research is research can be a rabbit hole. And I suggest that you wait to do your first draft before you do your research, because otherwise you'll never know everything about everything. So research can be a rabbit hole and just be going down one rabbit hole after the other. Instead, my suggestion is imagine as much as you can, and that will help you know what you don't know so that you can then target your research. So in my case, I sent my pages to this friend of mine who's the 911 trainer, and she got back to me and she said, well, we can't do this. We don't know how to do that. This isn't right, but here's something you nailed. She said, I've been in this situation where a woman has been in danger and the perpetrator is with her, but she can't let him know that she's on 911. And I guessed that an alert 911 operator is going to recognize that and ask yes, no questions. So in Troubled Water, Lark is the 911 operator says, are you in danger, ma'am? And Lark goes something like, yes, I'll have anchovies on that pizza. So, and so my friend said, that's exactly what I did in this situation. So I guessed right, but I had an expert who was able to confirm that. A couple of my friends who worked with me at CNN, I used to teach broadcast writing to some of the interns. One of them became a White House correspondent. And of course, I covered the White House before cell phones, before the internet. Josh Lederman covered AP for the covered AP as a journalist covering Obama with the internet, cell phone. So Josh read some of my chapters and helped me make sure that I was getting it right in the current day and age. So beta readers, you need to have beta readers who like to read, who know how to take apart a book and know what's the gold standard and if you're hitting it. People with expertise, and people who tell you the truth.
Do you ever use fiction writers?
Sure. Oh yeah.
Other fiction writers? I'm just curious because I feel like the feedback I get from my beta readers is so different if it comes from a reader or a writer. And
what's the difference that you've noticed?
I find that my readers, non-writers, give me feedback that is similar to what you started out in your beta reader answer, saying, look at this was a little confusing. This I loved, I'd like to see more of that. My writer beta readers tend to be very specific about writing and also tend to say things that are specific to their writing style too, I think.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. There was one beta reader I had who basically wanted to rewrite my whole book. I said, well, no, I'm not going to do that.
So it's all good advice. But I find that the readers leave me more room to do what I need to do.
Yeah. Oh, that's helpful. I'm glad you made that distinction. That's helpful to me too. Thank you.
And we have some more questions here. What type of permission, Aubrey asked, what type of permission or conversations do you have with family members when you're using their story in your plots?
It depends on it. I mean, in some cases, what I'm using is maybe just a little tidbit here and there. It's not like I'm taking something whole. But so it's sort of more of a composite than anything. So, in many cases, I don't at all. And I don't need to really, because it's fiction. And so it's not meant to be true. And if someone, says, well, it didn't happen that way. Well, of course it didn't, because it's fiction. But it still can be inspired by things that actually happened.
And those of you who have asked questions after I ask and John answers, if you want to do a follow-up, if you want to turn your mic on or whatever,
Exactly. That's good. Yeah.
fine. It's absolutely fine, of course. Susan says, when you are deep into writing a book and bringing up emotion, can you sleep?
Oh, that's a very good question. I have found through trial and error that I do my best writing first thing in the morning. If I try to do any writing before I go to bed, I'm not going to sleep very well because I'm still stirred up. When I wrote Bullet in the Chamber, I cried basically the whole time I wrote it. And that's okay. Crying is a great safety valve. And I wish more guys recognized and accepted that, because grief is something that is there and it's going to find a way out anyway. But if you let it fester, it's going to be corrosive and it's going to find its way out, but usually in a way that's not as productive. Crying is tremendously productive, I think, because it releases that emotional buildup.
Aubrey asks again, what were the overarching changes you had to make in those 14 revisions of the first book that took you 10 years?
Probably the most fundamental one is that it had been rejected about 10 times. And I took it to a book club that met in our neighborhood in Atlanta. 25 women read the manuscript and then let me sit in on their critique, which is daunting to begin with because it's women taking your book apart. And one of the things I learned, there was a moment in Fast Track where Lark says, I'm going to jump in the shower and I'll be right there. And these women go, we do not jump in the shower. We savor the experience. And so that was one thing I learned. But probably the biggest thing that came out of that thing is that as I listened to them talk, I realized I had 3 subplots I didn't need. And so in the rewrite, I was able to extract those. And by doing so, my novel went from 150,000 word mishmash to a 75,000 word mystery suspense novel. I didn't even know what my genre was until I got rid of all that extraneous stuff. Because it was just helpful to listen to them go, well, you didn't really, tie up that loose end, and this seemed to go off the track. And so those were really, really helpful bits of information that helped.
Aubrey, I suspected you had an underlying agenda to your question. I think Aubrey got the 150,000 word manuscript.
200,000 first draft.
Yeah.
With subplots that I've so expertly woven in, I'm not sure how to pull them out. So that was actually really helpful. Yes, I had an underlying, because you said, you could save us those 9 years. So I really want to save. It's already been 5 years, and I've actually only been really writing and calling myself a writer since the pandemic. So,
now you're serious. Now you're serious about it.
Yeah, it's killing me. But
well, here's the thing. If I can give you some encouragement,
sure.
You probably have more than one book in you, and you don't have to shoehorn everything into that one book. So, especially because an agent is probably going to say, Aubrey, what else are you working on? And you could say, oh, this is my one hit. What? No, I've got 5 other books that I'm thinking of. That's dollar signs to a prospective agent. So think in terms of, some of these things may be gems for further down the pike.
Thanks.
Yeah.
John, it sounds to me like you talk to women and have women readers almost like sensitivity readers. In a way,
what do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, because I know that a lot of people are using sensitivity readers for racial questions or issues that have to do with their book that they can't possibly be 100% clear on, right? So they have input from others. Yes. So it sounds to me almost because Carol's other question had to do with your choosing to write a female protagonist. So having all these women involved in reading, critiquing your work, you kind of are getting that sensitivity feedback that you've nailed it or you haven't. So, because there is that question of appropriation, you know, I haven't really heard it used regarding gender about a protagonist itself, but, you know, you hear it on so many other, mostly cultural appropriation. But, you know, there is the question. I mean, my main protagonist is female, but almost all my short stories are written from the POV of a man, which I never even noticed until somebody pointed it out to me. And I don't know why. But it does make you wonder sometimes if you're getting it right. And it sounds like you must be getting it right.
Well, there's a lot in that observation, and I do think I'm getting it right, but I know that I'm not going to please everybody. There was one woman who reviewed Troubled Water, and I did not know her. And in her review, she wrote, you know, as soon as I knew that this was a guy writing as a woman, I couldn't wait to get my hands on this to show him all the ways he was getting it wrong. And she said by the 5th page, I forgot that it was a guy writing as a woman. So that was really encouraging. My agent is a woman. So I do get that encouraging feedback from women, but I think that the bigger minefield is in racial issues, especially. I mean, I know that there's a debate of, if you're a white person, you have no business even trying to write as an African American, and I understand that. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I do not write as an African American. I have some African American characters, but they're tangential. They're not, because that was not my upbringing. I have a lot more friends now who, I could go to if I wanted to do that, but I just think I would be on too thin. The ice would be too thin for me to be able to do it well. That said, however, I think that, let me back away from race again and look at the bigger picture. There comes a point where you can only write from your personal experience and your own bubble for so long before it's going to sound alike. And I think that an important thing for a writer to do is to be able to get out of their comfort zone and ask questions of other people to follow your curiosity about the people around you. And a lot of writers are either shy or introverted. And so it's, you're in your comfort zone when you're in your bubble writing. And so my suggestion is, at times when you have to be out there, instead of feeling like you've got to be on, which can be daunting and draining, ask questions. Because as soon as you're asking a question, the focus is off you and it's on another person. And you'd be amazed at how willing people are to talk about themselves. And so when you're listening, you're learning, and that's fueling your subconscious, and it is widening your horizon as a writer. So whether or not you're going to, write as an African American or a Native American or whatever, anyone from those backgrounds or who is, wearing that hat, get to know them and learn from them, because it'll inform your fiction one way or the other.
Thank you. I have a journalism question.
Uh-oh.
Well, actually, I have a journalism related question, and anybody else who would like to ask those questions, please feel free. I'm curious where you source your news.
Good question. The Associated Press. It is by far the most reliable, straight ahead, just the facts, ma'am, source, because you're going to find out what you need to know about the important stuff. Reuters is another wire service. It's based in the UK, so it's got a little less US centric approach. I get my broadcast news from NPR. I mean, I'm in the car. I listen to All Things Considered, Morning Edition, because their interviews play it straight. I don't watch CNN anymore. I don't watch MSNBC. I do watch them every now and then, but that's not my go-to place for just the facts now, because everybody is doing news analysis. And so And it's fine to do that. I read the New York Times, I read the Washington Post. There are tremendous, but there are tremendous resources like that. But I don't primarily go to broadcast news, because primarily now they're trying to generate heat, not light.
That's right.
And you have to sit there and listen. It's a lot faster to read to get
Yeah.
the facts that you know, and then you can go wherever you want after that. But if, rock bottom, get the AP app and you'll get the facts that you need.
Great idea. Thank you. Janet asked, what are you working on now? Just, are you working on a memoir, another novel?
Yes, to both.
Yes,
This is a little insight into the creative process. There was a point where I had 3 projects going at once. I could have launched any one of them. I write mystery suspense, so I was doing notes on book 6 in the Lark Chadwick series. I'd like to be able to write a literary novel, but that's a genre that's beyond my ability, and so I'm going to probably need to take some classes. But the topic is loneliness. I wanted to kind of delve into that. And then I was interested in writing a memoir. So what I did is, on one day I'd do the work on the memoir. The next day I'd work on book 6, and then I'd work on the loneliness literary book. And I decided that I'd work on each one a little bit at a time and see which one grabbed me. The memoir grabbed me. So I've been working on that for the last year. The working title is Pivot Points, a life of plot twists, because what I've done is I've identified about 15 pivotal moments in my life that, where things happened unexpectedly that put me in a new direction and brought my life to where it is today. So that's what I'm working on now.
How long are you taking now on your novel? I'm more concerned about the series now. How long between publications on your series?
Oh, it seems to go 2 years or longer. I mean, the fortunate thing is I'm never under contract. I mean, I've got friends who have to turn around a book in like 9 months. To me, that would be like writing with a gun at my head. So here's the other thing. Procrastination is a thing. It is part of the creative process. And so I'm writing when I'm thinking about it. Rumination is also writing. And so that kind of is a decompression kind of thing. So I'm still cooking it. But a couple of years between novels is typical. And I'm glad to hear Hank Philip Ryan is going to be with you guys. I just interviewed her for my one-to-one live stream YouTube program. And we talked for about an hour. And if you go to my website, johndedakis.com, there's a link to that on the events page. She's wonderful. She's got so much practical information. And she's generous with her time and her insights. So you are in for a treat when she shows up.
Yes, you can talk with Hank for a long time. She's full of insight and she's very helpful, generous. I think we've all had wonderful experiences with Hank. I put John's website again into the chat, johndedakis.com. So in case you're having issues with spelling his name or anything, it's fairly
that never happens.
Straightforward. It's right there. Any more questions? We're good. Well, John, this was really wonderful.
Thank you so much.
We've all learned a lot, and we're all very curious about all this stuff that you shared with us today.